once, Winston, what was in room 101. I told you that you knew already. Everyone knows.
George Orwell's book, 1984, is cracking, isn't it? Very good book, George, well done. If a bit grim.
The thing that is in room 101 is the worst thing in the world.
Now, 1984 evokes a dystopian future where no one is free to think what they really think. No, it's more than that. Where you learn not to think those things in the first place. In the world of 1984, your loyalty to the party can never be in question. Your thoughts are policed. So you have to mess about with your own brain. You have to tell yourself that Big Brother is brilliant. And you've got to make yourself believe it, even if you don't believe it, or they'll get you.
The thought police would get him, just the same. He had committed, would have committed, even if he had never set pen to paper, the essential crime that contained all others in itself. Thought crime, they called it.
Orwell's masterpiece coined all sorts of phrases that have lasted through the years, taking on new meanings and always being on hand to make sense of crazy things going on in the world. Thought crime is one. Another is the idea of doublethink, which Orwell said was holding two contradictory beliefs in your mind at the same time and accepting both of them, but in different social contexts.
To know and not to know. To be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies. To hold simultaneously two opinions which cancelled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them.
To know and not to know. To think something and yet not to think it. Sounds like my life. And, I bet, yours. Now, I haven't been up all that long today, but already I think I've had about 1,000 contradictory thoughts about the world, my life, myself, what I believe, what I should have for breakfast. That's fine when it's to do with my breakfast. I'll resolve that. But what do I do when it's about climate change, about what it really is? What I think it is and what it really is and what it really means, how much trouble we're really in, what that should imply for how I live and what it doesn't seem to. What do I do with that information? What do you do with it? What do we all do with it?
Please, what do you want me to do?
You will do what is required of you.
I'm Dave. Welcome to Your Brain on Climate. And in this episode, we are going to be talking all about cognitive dissonance.
Your brain on climate.
George Orwell was well ahead of his time. 1984 was published in 1949. The so-called father of cognitive dissonance, a guy called Leon Festinger, didn't coin the term cognitive dissonance, didn't formalise the idea until 1957, 8 years after Orwell had come up with the idea of doublethink. Now, Festinger defined cognitive dissonance as the mental discomfort you experience when you're holding two or more contradictory beliefs, values, or ideas in your head at the same time. He might also have included actions, when we're doing things that don't seem to fit with the story that we tell ourselves about our values and we become aware of it. Perhaps the textbook example of this is people who genuinely care about climate change but who fly perhaps a lot. I've known quite a few people like that, and hands up, right? That includes me. I've definitely flown more than my fair share myself. Come at me with the hypocrite stick if you like. I am a hypocrite.
Your attention, please. Passengers for flight KL125 to London, I requested to board the aircraft and after boarding passed.
But this podcast ain't social media, so back off. We're going to allow ourselves to be a bit more complicated than that. Cognitive dissonance, you see, is a feature, not a bug, of our lives, and that means hypocrisy is as well. And we all cope with it in highly evolutionarily evolved, but to be honest, often desperately counterproductive ways that can mess up not just our own heads and our own lives and our behaviours, but also how our societies work or don't work. As Orwell understood all too well in 1984, the power of wanting to fit in with the people around us, the habits that we see reinforced, and to deal with the complexity of what we think about anything at all and where those ideas come from and how confusing it can all be, that power can cause us to turn blind eyes to all sorts of things that at some level we know to be dissonant with the idea that we have of us. To know but not to know. To think something and yet not to think it.
I contain multitudes.
This episode of Your Brain on Climate is the second in a two-parter, looking at different aspects of how the brain deals with information, what it likes, and information, what it does not like. Last time round, I chatted to Professor Adam Harris all about confirmation bias. That was our tendency, if you remember, to prefer information that fits our existing worldviews. And that's very much part of our wider strategy for dealing with the cognitive dissonance that bedevils us every day. This time, though, we're going to look at cognitive dissonance itself, right full on, in the Chevy Chase, and we're going to look at it with the wonderful Sarah Stein Lubrano. Sarah is a researcher whose work is at the intersection of cognitive science, psychology, and politics, therefore right up our Strasse. Sarah knows a vast amount about cognitive dissonance, including how deeply prone to it we all are.
Immediately, I was feeling the dissonance of being a person who believes in economic equality, but then also I have a cleaner. So that was a big one. And she came to our house to clean things, and she does a very good job. And then I feel conflicted about the contradiction between my belief that really we should all be getting roughly the same deal materially in life and the fact that I pay her to clean my house for not very much, even though it's more than, whatever. But yeah, probably many other times in ways I haven't yet recognized, because a lot of cognitive dissonance is unconscious. It happens without us necessarily consciously noticing it.
Sarah hosted the brilliant podcast called What Do We Want? About the inner lives of activists. Go and check it out. It's finished now, but the back catalogue is still there. But most excitingly and pertinently for this chat, she's got a book coming out in the middle of May. It's called Don't Talk About Politics: How to Change 21st Century Minds. It is cracking. She very kindly sent me a copy to have a look at. It's got some exciting prescriptions for how individually and collectively we can help persuade others to care about the world, including on climate change. Before we get started properly with the chat with Sarah, if you like this show and you want to give it some dosh, that dosh is massively needed and it's appreciated. It's just me doing this humble little indie podcaster in a sea of identikit crap by celebrities and huge rich companies. And I pay my guests, which loads of them don't do. So please do consider joining the small but loyal army who pop to patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate to chip in. Thanks hugely to Hope, to David, to you and to Joe for their support since the last episode. And please, please, please do give me a review on your podcast medium of choice. Yes, Lindsay, that means you. And do listen out for these owl noises, because they mean there's a link in the show notes for more information. So look, you've had my COD version of talking about cognitive dissonance. So let's hear Sarah define it properly.
Right. So dissonance is a theory that has much empirical evidence that people face discomfort when they notice, or even unconsciously notice, a contradiction between their own beliefs or actions. So either two beliefs or a belief and an action. And that we actually experience that as discomfort, and that we want to reduce that discomfort as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And usually we do that one of two ways. So we might engage in what's called rationalization, which is when we find reasons to collapse that contradiction as quickly, to kind of justify that there isn't really a contradiction there. I always think about rationalization as coming up with very creative reasons that are not, in fact, the reason you're engaged in the thing you're engaged in. So with a smoker might say, well, I know smoking is bad for me and I'm smoking anyway right now, but smoking makes me lose weight and losing weight is good for you, so it's fine. Now, that is not why that person's having a cigarette at a party, right? And, with climate, most of us, anyone who flies probably engages in some really weird rationalizations about why they fly. They might say, oh, it's so important to go to this conference, so I must, or well, I do all these other climate things, so it's okay if I go on a flight to the Maldives or whatever, right?
Or the plane is going to go anyway. That's one I once had a very, very long argument with a climate economist friend of mine in a pub who assured me that it doesn't work like that. Like the plane is actually not necessarily going to go anyway.
And even if it does, it will be less heavy, so it will use less fuel.
Right.
But yes, yeah, exactly. So that's a rationalization. And the other one, of course, is confirmation bias, which your listeners heard all about. And that's when we really selectively believe sources that essentially agree with us or confirm our existing worldviews. So if I'm looking for information about the Trump administration, I am, to be clear, a very sad American who is very not interested in Donald Trump as a president, to put it nicely. Not that we should. And if I look up news about the Trump administration, I'm probably going to instinctively trust sources that are anti-Trump more than any that appear to support him or even be neutral about him. And that's what confirmation bias is. And obviously there are some rational reasons to trust sources that already agree with you more, but there's also quite an irrational bias as well. And that helps us as well, because then we don't have to face contradictions. When we come into the site of contradictory information about something we already believe, we can just dismiss it and say, oh, well, you can't trust that site, So that allows us to reduce the discomfort as well. And so in both cases, we do our best to reduce this discomfort as much as possible. But of course, that means we're living in a very contradictory way. And all of us are. I want to emphasize this because the world we live in requires that of us. If you want to be a Marxist like me, you can say it's because we live in the contradictions of capitalism. And I think actually we live in the contradictions of many other systems as well, where we're forced to live in ways that are not necessarily in line with other beliefs that we hold. And we have some choice, but we also don't have infinite or excellent choices.
It's such an interesting thing, though, isn't it, to think about, like you used examples of flying and things like that, but just like the day-to-day ways in which something happens. Here's an example. I was on the tube yesterday and a poor homeless guy was asking for money. And I did that thing of I don't know, I didn't have any money to give him, but I just looked away but it wasn't just that I was looking away. A bit of my brain was coming up with, I could feel all these things popping into my brain going
okay, yeah.
Oh, well, you can't help him. Or is he really, does he really need all of that? You kind of have this stuff going. And it is this discomfort in your brain when you're like, I have a story about myself that I am a good man. And then, but I'm not behaving like a good man in this moment, makes you feel funny. And so then another thing happens, which is the reason why I'm not doing that is all this stuff. And that's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. Then you'll say, oh, but if I give him money, he might use it on drugs or he might, whatever.
Rum old time at the moment, innit? Turn on the news in the morning, which I don't advise, but if you do, you'll hear stuff like this.
Israeli missiles have destroyed the intensive care unit and surgery department of the only hospital still functioning in Gaza City, the Al Ahli Baptist Hospital.
Rattling investors, sparking dramatic losses.
Global financial markets are tanking again.
Looking just at the temperature hitting 40.9 degrees, up from 40.3 degrees a few years ago.
There's a good chance that we could see that fall again.
Look, I don't know about you, but that can make me feel a bit anxious. But not just anxious, useless. Like, what am I supposed to do about all of that? I can't do anything really about any of it. But it gets into my head anyway. And it turns out, says Sarah, that it's in these moments of feeling like you should care, but you can't do anything. That's when cognitive dissonance really bites you in the bum.
So something that's interesting about dissonance research is that when it came out in the 70s, it upset a lot of psychologists, behaviorists, because behaviorists, as you may well know, want to believe that people are largely motivated by rewards and punishments of one kind or another. And dissonance theory is actually saying something very different and in some ways more profound, which is that we are motivated to construct a understanding of ourselves that is consistent. And we are motivated by meaning and our sense of self. And it turns out, because the behaviorists spent a lot of time trying to disprove dissonance theory, and in the end only helped refine it, we are also motivated by a sense of agency. We do not want to develop a consistent sense of self that implies that we don't have agency. And one of the things that most likely predicts whether we'll feel the discomfort of dissonance when we encounter a contradiction is if it does appear to limit our sense of agency, or, at least kind of challenge a type of agency we want to have. It's more complicated than that, because sometimes we actually decide we don't have agency to avoid dissonance about not doing a thing that we feel pressured to do. But in any case, agency is a big trigger here. And in this case, this is a great example, because what's probably going on for you, and definitely is going on for me, is that sometimes when I hear news stories about the Trump administration, part of me thinks I should be doing something about this right now, right? How can I be sitting here in my North London, lovely house, and there's like concentration camps of migrants in America, and I'm an American, what should I do? And then that's a contradiction between my, in this case, lack of action and possibly lack of agency and my beliefs. And of course, that will trigger the same process of confirmation bias. But in this case, probably, I do believe in these terrible things happening in America, so it will probably be rationalization. Well, I can't really do anything. Well, I am doing this one thing. And sort of by essentially adding reasons to think well of yourself, you reduce the dissonance in some way.
That can't be stressed enough, as I spoke about with Adam Harris last time round, that cognitive dissonance and our strange strategies for dealing with it are a feature, not a bug, of the human brain. They're strange strategies, yeah, but they're vital for getting us through the day. But that doesn't mean some people don't take it all a little bit far.
Hang on a moment. The Prime Minister himself was hospitalised with the virus. How much more evidence do you need?
Well, was he hospitalised with the virus, or was he ill from something else? You see, there's a lot of claims going on, and of course there might have been something happening in the past.
You're suggesting
I think cognitive dissonance, which feels to me like the more you talk about it, it feels like a desperately fundamental thing in kind of humans organise themselves in the world and how they think about stuff. Does it what's that got to do with conspiracy theories and with, like, I know you say most people aren't outright deniers, but there are some, and does is that work there?
I think so. I mean, yes is the answer. It's not just I think so. Yes, we might look at conspiracists as people who faced some contradictions and then did remap, which is actually like sort of virtuous in a way, right? That they sort of saw some contradictions in the system and they were like, well, I've got to change my theory of the world, because many of us aren't brave enough to do that. But then the way that they remapped is A, wrong, and B, often problematic. And in particular, conspiracies tend to, I would say, over-personalize systemic issues most of the time, and or over, I don't want to say over-moralize exactly, but kind of strip them of their complexity, right? And that's true on both the left and the right. So like the right wing might have a conspiracy that is the socialism of fools, and it's that like a bunch of elites at the top, often Jews, are doing this thing and they're pulling the strings, right? And a left wing person might have kind of a similar one, maybe including the anti-Semitism, but it's because they are all greedy, horrible people. But neither of those are good summaries of what's really at stake, which is a very complex systemic. I mean, I'm not saying I don't want to, get rid of these billionaires. I do, but they're sort of overly personalized, overly moralistic summaries of what are actually systemic problems, often with extra terrestrial features, let's say.
Not aliens. Aliens? Not aliens.
Whoever, maybe.
Okay, she does mean aliens. Right.
Or just like people like, whatever. QAnon is it just has kinds of features that are unnecessary to explain the world. Like, why do the elites band together? We don't need to think that they're in a sex trafficking ring to do that. They band together because it's in their material, class, etc. interests, right? And it doesn't mean that they are drinking children's blood or whatever the hell is going on in the QAnon theory.
Oh, it's not such a good story, though, is it? Unfortunately.
It's a more interesting story, and I think you can kind of see there that the brain is working overtime to develop something it can attach to, right? And say, I now understand. I've remapped my action possibilities. A lot of the time, conspiracy theories give us a sense that maybe we can't fix the problem where children are trapped in a pizza parlor, although, as we know, someone did actually invade the QAnon pizza parlor and try to rescue the children. But it's at least saying you can be a good person just by knowing that this is the truth and letting other people know. So it gives you a possibility for action, however small. Or, in the QAnon case, you can go on these forums and try to solve the problem solve the mystery of it. And that will make you a good person. So it does give most conspiracists some sense that they are the good guys, because we all think we're the good guys, and that there are some things they can do.
And they're in a community with loads of other people who think that too, right?
Yeah. Oh, you also get it. We're both awoke. We've both woken up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely dissonance is at work there. But it's just not working great for the people who are experiencing it and then become conspiracy theorists.
Do you ever feel like there's two yous sharing the same brain? I talked at the start of the show about flying. Perhaps the best example of something I sometimes do, not as much as I used to, but I do still sometimes do it, which I feel the least able to square with my self-image as an all-round virtuous climate Jesus. And maybe you know what I mean by this. At those kind of moments, it feels like there's not one Dave at all to me. There's the Dave who cares about the planet, and in the same brain, there's the Dave who actually lives on that planet and can be a right hypocritical bastard at times. Those two me's don't seem to sit together. They don't like each other. They rub each other up the wrong way. If I think about the first me, the one that hugs trees, bangs on about climate change, I get ashamed of the second me. But they're both me, as are like 1,000 other me's, and getting my head around that feels complicated sometimes, impossible perhaps, but also, and I know this to be the case, my therapist tells me so, healthy and honest. Because we've got this idea, don't we, this fiction that we are one uncomplicated self. But we ain't, and we know that, as Walt Whitman said in 1851.
Do I contradict myself? Very well, then. I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes.
So much of the shrieking and the shouting that happens on social media or in the press is about people revealing themselves, shock horror, to contain multitudes, not to be a pure and unbroken snowflake. And, says Sarah, this idea that we are one unbroken self, and that battle that we all have to try to hang on to it, to preserve it at all costs, that is a particularly Western idea. So is it all to do with this crazy idea we've got that there is a thing called a Sarah and there is a thing called a Dave?
Yes.
And it is an eternal, unchanging, beautiful thing that when you die goes off to a happy place in the clouds. Well, is it down to the idea that we have of of ourselves?
It's definitely our sense that we have a self. Who knows if it's the eternal soul, but it's definitely the sense that there is such a thing as us, because that's partially a very Western idea, right? And by Western, I don't mean literally to the West, but I mean the sort of global North, as they say. And every 10 years, there'll be a new term for this thing. But to people that are in very developed, in quotes, countries, the term in psychology is weird. It's Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries. And the thing that I always try to remind audiences when I talk about weirdness is that when we say people in the West are weird, we don't just mean they are unlike the other groups of people that we could measure if we run studies on, say, people who still live in small tribes somewhere. Rather, it's that they are not only different from those other people, but they are on a bell curve. They are on a very far end of one bell curve. They are extremely statistically unusual on the spectrum of where human beings could be. And weird people that are living in industrialized, sort of semi-wealthy to wealthy, pseudo-democratic countries, let's say, they are particularly individualistic, and they believe in fixed traits within people in a way that other groups of people don't. So when you run studies, for example, on Western people, and you say, oh, you went to the market and you accidentally picked up your friend's bag and took it home. does this make you a bad person? On average, Western people are more likely to be like, yeah, that was really like sloppy and inconsiderate of me, or whatever, something worse. But if you say this story to a person who isn't living in a weird country, they'll be like, no, it was a mistake. Or even if people do something that is wrong, let's say they, I don't know, commit a small crime, it's much less likely that a non-weird person would think about that as a fixed attribute of that person's characteristics. They're much more likely to attribute human behavior to a situation. That person was hungry, that person was tired, that person was confused, that person was having a bad day. Whereas we tend to very quickly form character assessments because we seem to believe much more in the individual as a real thing and as a fixed thing.
So I think we've got to say some more about that because that feels important. So is it that the idea that is particularly strong in weird countries is this idea that there is a thing that is myself. There is a kind of unchangingness to me, and that what happens with cognitive dissonance is that, like, you know, things come along all the time that sort of conflict with this idea that I have of me, and that's the problem.
Yes, exactly. So dissonance does exist in non-weird cultures, but it's less. It seems less easily triggered and may be triggered more by our relationships with other people. So whether I'm relating well to this person that I'm committed to, rather than I thought I was X kind of person, for example. But in the West, yes, we experience a lot of dissonance because we have this sense that we are a certain way, and anything that contradicts that self-image is a threat to our sense of self. And the threat to sense of self is a big one in psychology. It's very powerful as a motivator for people, but especially weird people. So yes, a cognitive dissonance is, I would say, a fairly weird trait on the whole. We experience it more. We think we're real rather than situational.
Oh God, I can't cope with not being real.
Well, we you know, we might be real, but we might not be as individual as we think we are.
This is Maggie the cat. Does Maggie contain multitudes? Maybe. She certainly contains two distinct personas of very cute and lovely and absolute bastard. But I don't think she contains multitudes, not in the same way that we do. I don't think she holds two contradictory concepts in her small, pretty, furry little head at the same time and rationalises away the one that causes her the most distress. When Maggie the cat wants food, she don't want food like a bit. She isn't thinking about the impact that food might have on her waistline or whether it might spoil her tea. She wants food absolutely, she wants it now, and there are no internal contradictions, I think. Not for the first time. I think it might be quite nice being a cat. But humans ain't cats. We're complicated, and we do contain multitudes, ambiguities, contradictions. And the daily hassle of dealing with those contradictions can make us a little bit squiggly. But in that squiggliness lies something that can be done about it. And if you're not familiar about it, let me introduce you to the concept of deep canvassing. Actually, you can go back to episode 29, my chat with Alex Evans, where we talked about deep canvassing. It's a type of conversation with people that disagree with you that is carefully structured not to raise their defences. It's a technique of asking someone what they think about their position and gently probing, exploring, cracking open the dissonances that they themselves see to be there. Like if someone says they're opposed to gay marriage, you ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how much? And if they say 8 out of 10 opposed, you say, okay, interesting. Why is that not 10 out of 10? And perhaps I'll say, oh, well, look, I mostly don't support it, but I guess, you know, I also kind of think people should be able to do what they want, maybe just not in this case. Or I do think love is a nice thing, but traditional values matter more. Whatever it is, it shows that they contain multitudes and that they have different ideas held in tension. Deep canvassing is a thing that allows people to express their own uncertainties in their own terms and then sit with them. It's shown to be really, really effective. People free without a sense of threat, a sense of judgment, to voice and explore their own dissonance. Maybe not there and then, but over time come to the opinion that perhaps they are less violently opposed to something than they might have thought in the heat of the moment. And that is really, really important. You end up persuading yourself. But, as Sarah says, the problem with deep canvassing is it's really time consuming, it's really labour intensive, and it's not a way to change the world overnight. So she's got a better plan.
And deep canvassing seems to work a lot better than other forms of canvassing, and indeed it moves people on issues. There's a lot of evidence in America that it's moved people in progressive ways on things like immigration and trans people and so on. So yeah, but it's so time consuming, Dave. So what happens is I tell my students about this and they're like, I want to go deep canvassing and be a hero and change people's minds. But I do not think this is the main thing we should be doing right now. It's a good technique to learn because it really helps you understand what's going on for human beings behind the curtain. But actually, it's probably not going to be the thing that saves the world. It's just a little stepping stone where we can begin to understand the psychology at stake. Otherwise, you spend your whole life deep canvassing and get nearly nowhere. You have to be trained. It takes hours. It's exhausting. It's hard. I would do something else. And in my book, Don't Talk About Politics.
Very good. Out in May 2025. Pre-orders are appreciated.
Yes, please pre-order my book. It's fun. It's silly.
It is good. Sarah very kindly sent me a preview copy. It is a good book. You should read it. If you like this show, you will like the book.
Yeah, it's very explanatory, and then it has lots of practical takeaways, and it has lots of little jokes, and that doesn't mean it's not serious, but it's, yeah. I hope you read it. In my book, I talk about the things we can do that are much more structural than these kinds of conversations. I do talk about these kinds of conversations, but in truth, remember that dissonance is a contradiction between our beliefs and our actions. And so a lot of dissonance research has actually been about something else, not about deep canvassing, but about the fact that when we change our actions, our beliefs change too. And in fact, most political belief changes that people experience over the course of their lives have nothing to do with being engaged in debates or conversations, have nothing to do with being exposed to new ideas, because debates and being exposed to new ideas has almost no statistical effect at all on people's political beliefs. What changes their minds is changes in their daily actions or important actions in their life and different relationships with people. So, for example, there was a big shift on views on gay people. Why? Because people came out to their friends. So that changed the nature of their network of relationships, and they changed their mind on gay rights. When people become parents, when people have abortions, when people get denied abortions, there's a very interesting study on that. When people begin to do climate-related activities, those things change their mind on those issues because their life has changed. And part of the mechanism there, and you can do this in cognitive science experiments, is that when we change even a small action, it causes new dissonance, right? We used to believe this, we used to have this action, we reconciled them in this way, now we have a new action. One of the most powerful studies on this, in my opinion, is by a researcher called Kristin Laurin, and she does a thing where she just interviews people about bans that are coming up in their world. So like a smoking ban in Vancouver, or a plastic water bottle ban in San Francisco. And before these bans are enacted, people will say, I don't like this ban. I don't like people controlling my life. I don't want this. And as soon as the ban is enacted, people will not only say, well, actually now it's fine, but they will also believe that they always liked the ban and that they never really smoked that much. I think this is a bit sinister, to be clear. I actually don't think we should smoke in restaurants, and I think we should all use other water bottles. But the fact that our mind works this way, that it quickly rationalizes to a new position as soon as we have to change our actions, often within a day of the ban, right? It's a very quick shift, and it's a very quick rewriting of your memory. Shows how powerful changing our actions is, much more powerful than arguing with people or giving them reasons. And so, to move to climate, if we want to move people on climate, what we mostly need to do is let them change their lifestyle and give them ways of doing that. And their beliefs will follow. We've probably been doing things backwards, basically. What we're mostly facing is people who say, yes, but I have to get by. I need to survive. My kids are, like, I have to get my kid to school. Leave me alone, right? And so to give them any new opportunities to behave in climate-friendly actions is probably the best thing you can do for moving them on a spectrum, let's say, towards being more passionate or activist-y or whatever else you want them to do. And there's a debate in sociology about this that's being somewhat resolved, about whether climate actions, for example, are gateways or getaways, whether they let us off the hook or they get us involved in the movement. And most of the research seems to indicate that small climate actions are gateways. So I always say that protests are really ineffective at changing the government's mind, and they don't change the public's mind at all. It's amazing if you look at the data. No one's mind was changed by Extinction Rebellion. Forget it. I mean, of course, individual people will say so, but if you look at the public as a whole, it's nothing, right? Especially because you alienate people as well. The thing that protests do is they change the protesters, because they change their lives and their relationships a lot to be in that protest movement. Yeah, and once you start thinking this way, the idea of arguing with someone seems quite silly. But there are a lot of other things we can do to change the way people in our lives see the world.
I don't know about you, But for me, caring about climate these days is an exercise in perseverance. But amidst all the chaos and recent upheaval, it's become more obvious than ever just how many of us there are who are out here fighting for a sustainable future in our own ways. I'm Caitlin, the host of the Second Nature podcast. It's a community show where we talk with advocates, journalists, professors, and our insightful community from all around the world about what it takes to live sustainably in an unsustainable world. And if working on this show for the past year has taught me anything, it's that together, we are a force to be reckoned with. Every Wednesday on the show, we dive into a new topic, from fast fashion and plant-based cheese to sustainable gifting and climate policy. It's your weekly dose of climate optimism, action, and community, and I think you'll like it. You can find Second Nature wherever you listen to podcasts. See you there.
Your brain on climate.
Welcome back to Your Brain on Climate. I'm Dave. In this episode, which is the second in a two-parter, we're talking about cognitive dissonance with the fabulous Sarah Stein Lubrano. If you've only been half listening, shame on you, but here is a recap. Sarah's been explaining that cognitive dissonance is a tension between either your beliefs and your actions or two beliefs that you have about the world. So, for example, caring about climate change but flying a lot, or wanting radical change but also not wanting your life to radically change. Cognitive dissonance manifests first and foremost in your brain as a discomfort, one that you want to make go away, and one your brain is very good at making go away for you. And it does this by intellectual rationalisation, which of course may be bollocks. For example, it's okay to take this flight because the plane would go anyway, or confirmation bias, which we talked all about in the last episode, where we just look for and seek out the comforting information that tells us what we want to hear and we disregard the rest. This is why it's very hard to change people's minds just through facts or argument, by the way. When we come across ideas that conflict with the world as we think we understand it, we don't go, oh yeah, brilliant, great, thank you for telling me that, I shall change my entire worldview. Instead, we conclude, well, that person's wrong or an arsehole or is out to get us or their data is bias. And it feels like this is like the number one abiding message of everything we've talked about on this show for the last 4 years. So I hope you're getting it by now. You will not, in general, change the minds of people who don't like what you have to say by telling them they are wrong. In fact, you're more likely to harden them against you because this is the messed up human brain and how it works. So what does change people's minds? What makes cognitive dissonance go away? In Sarah's brilliant new book, Don't Talk About Politics, Sarah says two things do that. Things that feel to us not like we're being told to do something, but like it was our idea in the first place. Experiencing doing something new, like taking the train to France rather than flying and having quite a nice time doing it. Or secondly, hanging out with groups of people who have a collective identity you subconsciously want to fit in with. And because the power of wanting to belong to that group is a very powerful human social force, you end up adopting more of their worldviews than you might expect. So for this reason, Sarah says, perhaps the best thing you can do to someone who isn't into climate action is to make it easier for them to take an action. Any action about anything that feels roughly vaguely in the right ballpark, even if it's to fly slightly less. Because it's a crack in their previous story of themselves as someone who would never do something like get the train to France. It lets the light in to the dark cave of all of our tortured, confused little souls. So that's on a one-to-one kind of basis. But what does that all mean, I wondered, for the bigger picture, for politics? Yeah, you say in your book out in the middle of May, available from all good bookshops and some bad ones, you say that you don't think democracy, successful democracy, is about changing people's minds with words. That sounds like what you're saying there, but that feels like a really important thing that I guess a lot of people in the climate-y kind of world don't get. Like everything is about like, how do I mount the most persuasive argument? How do I, how do I frame my message in the right way? And it's not that stuff doesn't matter, but demonstrably it isn't enough, right?
Right. So I think there's going to be now this is the point where I stop looking like a cute and friendly author and I begin to look like a scary, horrible Marxist. There's two things going on here. One is, in the nicest way possible, a very important strand of liberal ideology that has been baked into kind of all of our minds, even if we don't identify as liberals, even if you're a grumpy Marxist like me, even if you're a conservative, whatever, who is for some reason listening to this niche climate podcast.
Right.
I mean liberal in a very specific sense. I mean interested in a certain a constellation of ideas that emerged during the Enlightenment in the sort of 1700s, 1600s, 1800s, etc. And it includes things like protection for private property, belief in the individual as the source of liberty, and so on. And, to be clear, there are some very important things in liberalism, right? In this tradition. In particular, I really like protection from state interference in your personal religious beliefs. I like lots of the protections for individuals. But there are also many things about liberalism as a political theory that don't work, even though they have remained embedded in our culture. And the belief that one of the most important parts of democracy is basically talking and voting is part of a liberal ideology where individuals can somehow, in this sort of abstracted way from the rest of their environment, sit and ponder ideas and come to the right conclusion on their own. That's a very liberal idea. And it's wrong. It's just empirically wrong. It is not how human beings think. It is not how they change their minds. We have unbelievable amounts of evidence about this. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't bits of liberalism worth preserving. And in my book, I make the argument that the most important thing we could do when it comes to thinking about politics now is take the bits of liberalism that are still defensible and important, like protection from government oppression, and sublate, to use a fancy word, sublate the parts that don't work into something else. Sort of reinvent them in a way that actually allows them to help us realize our larger ideals around personal freedom and also a better society. And so, in short, what we need to do then is go back and look at democracy and say, well, what is democracy really? If it's not us just having a bunch of pointless debates and then voting, what would it mean to live a democratic life? And the answer for me, and I make this argument at length in the book, is that we need to live in a world where it is regularly possible to try out new ways of living and where it is regularly possible to form relationships with new people who are different from us and have meaningful conversations with them. And right now, if you look at the data about the last 70 years, at least in the UK and America, but also in other places, in the United States and the UK, let's say, we have less opportunity for both of these things than ever before. We are at a low point in social trust in both cases. We trust our neighbors less. We have fewer friends than ever before. We talk to other people face to face less than ever before. We have increasingly limited social mobility. We are increasingly segregating again around not only race, but also class. We see that people are, for various reasons of lack, again, of economic mobility, staying where they lived in the first place rather than moving into a city or somewhere else, so they're not meeting people different from themselves. We're seeing the decline of social institutions that used to help people mix and meet as equals, which it turns out changes people's minds a lot on minority rights, for example. So we're going to university less, and we're going to less diverse universities and less diverse schools. And in short, we're living less and less democratic lives. We have fewer and fewer possibilities to really rethink our lives through action and relationship. And that's very important, and probably much more important than any amount of debating or critical thinking, in quotes, could ever be.
So if you are a climate campaigning organisation or and anyone trying to trying to change the world, giving people something to do, anything to do that feels, like something they haven't done before is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Giving people gateways. And also, I think we really underestimate the importance of people building new relationships. I think there's a sort of deep organizing, like people talk about deep canvassing. Let's talk about deep organizing. I think this is a term someone uses somewhere, and I'm sorry to have stolen it from them and probably said it differently. But right now, when I look at Trump's America, there are many things we should be doing to prevent the damage that's going to be done, and we're also going to have a lot of damage no matter what. But we also need to do a thing where we begin to rebuild the social networks that allow people to politically organize, that have been decimated, absolutely decimated, in the last couple of decades especially. We are currently relying on a networked protest model for most movements, most social movements, including most climate movements. So what that means really is that you're on social media and maybe you follow some people and they tell you there's going to be a protest or something, and then you show up. And maybe if you're very lucky, you become actually a passionate activist and you get into an affinity group, and then things are a little bit different. But most people who have engaged in a protest, which is still a minority of humans in any given democracy, are there because it seemed like an okay activity to do on a Sunday, and that's really different from being deeply embedded in a social world that supports you, that helps you, that exchanges material stuff with you, right? If you look at, in contrast, the civil rights movement in the United States, the people involved in those protests were on the whole deeply embedded in communities where that was also part of how they went to get their haircut every week and who they bought, they strategically bought all the things in their life from each other to support the local community and so on. So we need to go, I would say, back is the wrong word, but forward and with a historical look backward at models of organizing that actually ask more of us, because that's also likely to change our minds more and keep us embedded in a network of relationships that we need. And we need them politically, and we also actually need them to be healthy as human beings, although that's another rant for another time.
You knew this would happen, Winston. Don't deceive yourself. You've always known it. You must love him. It's not enough to obey. You must love him.
So look, brains, right? How can we stop thinking something, but not allowing ourselves to think it? Should we even do that? Is it possible? In her brilliant Wreath lecture from 2022, the author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, she rallies against the self-censorship that she sees happening in today's society, where we think something, but we tell ourselves we shouldn't because we're worried about being cancelled or being shouted at or not fitting in. And we don't think we should say that no matter what.
An American student once accosted me at a book reading. Why, she asked angrily, had I said something in an interview? I told her that what I had said was the truth, and she agreed that it was, and then asked, but why should we say it, even if it's true? At first, I was astonished at the absurdity of the question. Then I realized what she meant. It didn't matter what I actually believed. I should not have said it because it did not align with my political tribe.
Adichie says that all of us have got to guard against that and stand up against thinking one thing and doing another, even if that feels like it's going to get us in trouble, even if it goes against what our group or our tribe expects us to say. Call it out on our own brains first. Don't wait for society to somehow give us permission to say what we really think. See when you're gaslighting yourself. Well, that feels important, and I'm trying, but it also feels like it's not quite enough. Somehow, because that social stuff does matter too. I've loved chatting to Sarah about cognitive dissonance. I feel cognitively dissonant about climate change, the state of the planet, and my cosy little life, all the time. So this episode's been like therapy. But I'm just one bloke. And this stuff added up to the collective, societal, human, global level really matters. What we think and whether we allow ourselves to think it, not just because of how easy we find it collectively to turn a blind eye to things, to the state of the planet, the damage humanity is causing to this beautiful place, all for the sake of comfort or a dopamine hit. Humans are really good at ignoring stuff we don't like. That's what we do. As George Orwell, who started this episode, warned us, history is riddled with people, groups of people, whole countries of people, who have looked the other way when it was too difficult to contemplate what was staring them in the face. It's how totalitarian regimes commit horrors just out of obvious sight of daily life. And they, and most other people, just kind of go along with it. One place this is happening right now, in my opinion, is the world of tech. want to do an episode about AI soon. This isn't that episode, but those tech bros that are building hugely powerful AI, synthetic biology, are they really sure that what they're doing is a good idea? Is there really no doubt in there at all? I'm reading Mustafa Suleyman's book, The Coming Wave, at the moment, about the colossal and probably not massively positive effects on society that AI is going to have. And he says the tech industry has institutionalized this thing he calls pessimism aversion, this culture of not allowing yourself to admit this could all go wrong, being afraid of thinking the worst. Because the psychological implications of allowing yourself to think the worst, that your life's work could ruin humanity, is a bit much to take. So what the hell do we do about that collectively? We've talked a lot about kind of big politics and big systems and kind of, how to get people on a journey of climate awareness and all that sort of stuff. But what can each of us do in our lives? Like the next time we are feeling cognitively dissonant about a thing, like let's say, God forbid, not that anyone would listen to this program and go on an aeroplane, but let's say that someone was and they care about climate change and nagging away at the back of their head was, I'm sure I read somewhere this is bad for the planet, but that, but it's all right putting that away. Like, what should we cut ourselves a break, or what's a good strategy for kind of dealing with that moment, do you think?
Well, I think, look, firstly, we all should go on fewer flights to 0 flights. But I am a person who's from America and I have to go on book tour in America, and it's not going to happen for me right now, right? Rather, I think that dissonance seems to be triggered by individual new contradictions. But that's not how we should evaluate our lives necessarily. We need to zoom out and look at the contradictions that are present more broadly in our lives and resolve them, which is not necessarily how we'll experience the dissonance, right? And we need to do this politically. But we also need to do this in the sense of, here's a more structural contradiction that you could resolve individually, right? I have a lot of friends who work really high-powered jobs doing fancy things. They earn lots of money, and then they spend like nearly all of that money just recovering from their fancy jobs. And in the process, of course, they consume so much, right? And I think this is a contradictory way of living, because actually you're not necessarily any better off for having spent 60 hours a week working in this job if you spend all that money in the end on,
wine.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, any of it, or just a bigger house, blah, blah, blah. So I think the best thing we could do if we're capable of it is notice the contradictions, but look at the biggest ones in your life and think about how you could change your life so that that's less present, which also means flying less. But rather than focusing on any one individual instance, we should do a systemic analysis of our life. And then the other thing is that we need to think about this as an alert that there's something in our world that's wrong. The kind of political theory that I studied is called critical theory, and it has a lovely term that isn't present in most liberal political theory, which is called social pathology. Because in liberal theory, we often talk about questions of either injustice or inequality. But if you think about a world where everyone, and I'm stealing this example from a book, which I can link to, you can put in the show notes if you want, but the author says, if you think about a world where everyone can go on a flight to the Maldives, and they're equally allowed to do that, and there's no individual person who's experiencing an injustice because of that, there's still something wrong about that in the world we live in if everyone's going on these cheap flights somewhere, right? And yet injustice doesn't really cover it, inequality doesn't really cover it. Of course, we could draw elaborate ties to either of those terms, but that's not the immediate thing that comes to mind. Rather, there's this third bad thing that's happening, and the word that he would use is social pathology. This is a social pathology, and critical theorists use this term quite a bit. So I think that a lot of the time when we're experiencing dissonance, we're really experiencing some like remnant of a social pathology, something that is contradictory and flawed in the logic of our own society. And we're not going to be able to resolve those at the individual level, including we're not going to be able to resolve this by being vegans who never go on a plane. That will still not resolve that contradiction for anyone except maybe us, but probably not even us. We have to resolve them as societies. We have to be able to look at them and say, this is no longer a good form of life for human beings. And I feel that very strongly about most aspects of capitalism, if not all, and also just a lot of consumption that we participate in as a society, So yeah, the interesting contradictions are systemic, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't experience them individually, but we've got to zoom out.
Yeah, which is great because they are the source of so much of the dissonance, right? It's you know, we are being told it is all right to live in a way that is not all right, but it's very hard for us to kind of opt out of those things.
Yeah, I mean, even if you think about addiction, right? At least addiction you could, in theory, resolve individually. If I am addicted to cigarettes or heroin, I can, in theory, end that problem for myself. But I can't really end the problem that there are planes that are going to cause massive climate collapse, you know, without doing something with other people. And that's where the logic of the individual ends. And it's part of why a very individualistic focus is both not compatible with psychological reality for human beings or political reality for human beings. It's why we've got to move beyond basic liberal political theory. Climate activists, let's go. Let's do something else. We have, let's say, a romantic fantasy about what it means to be involved in politics that we came by honestly because it's part of our culture, that says that, you know, the individual on their own reasoning finds the truth, and that we can do this, and then we can argue with other people and we can bring them around to the truth, and that's extremely virtuous of us. And maybe the most important thing about us as humans is how smart we are and how good we are at arguing with other humans. And I am completely guilty of being part of this culture because I went to too many fancy institutions where I spent too much time in seminars arguing with men who spoke over me about how they were wrong, right? So it's not that I'm not quickly brought into this romantic fantasy of what politics is. I am. But like a lot of romantic fantasies, like any bad relationship you've ever been in about that person, whatever, you know, you've got to leave it eventually. And we need to leave this fantasy that the most important thing we can do in politics is persuade, and especially persuade with reasons. And I would say this somewhat includes certain kinds of performative actions also, probably. Again, the protesters don't change the government's mind. They do not change the public's mind. Sometimes it backfires. They change their own minds. They change their own lives. So I think we've got to go and think about what it means to include people in a new lifestyle and a new network of connections. That is the thing that is going to change people's mind and change the way they live, which is so much more important in a lot of ways, right? Of course, lots of people will conceptually agree with you if you give them a lot of good reasons and then keep living their life the way they did. We have to bring people around to a new way of living. And offering them a possibility for that is actually a very democratic thing, much more democratic than just arguing with other humans. So if you really care about something, I would say, you know, yes, to be clear, like I support, you know, gluing yourself to a painting every once in a while too. But the very best thing you could do, in my opinion, is create a world for people where they can engage in a different lifestyle, which is not easy, but it is also possible. You know, I live in a commune that I built for myself in North London. I made my house communal living. Why? Lots of reasons. But part of it is that I think it's a better form of life, right? It's a better form of life for me and for the other people. And I think there are a lot of examples of ways of living that are better for us, but that we don't feel we have access to. Most parents I talk to are like, what am I doing raising one child, you know, raising this child with maximum like 2 parents in the same house? This is madness. But right now our housing policies, our legal policies, more or less enforce the nuclear family. It's very hard to get out of. So I think we need to think about systemic changes truly about the systems in which we live our life and not just offering reasons or even making grand statements. We have to think about not just what we would die for, but what we would live for and what that would mean day to day. And it's much harder than arguing with people. Changing your life and then offering other people a way to materially change their own life is much harder. But also it's really beautiful and interesting. And like at the end of my book, I say, you know, if you, like me, are a little bit caught up in the liberal ideal of arguing with other people, it's probably partially because you're in love with ideas. And I'm in love with ideas too, but the best way that you can honor the ideas you love is to live them, even though it's much harder work.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Your Brain on Climate with the fabulous, wonderful Sarah Stein Lubrano. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you go buy her book when it comes out. If you would like to support this one-man operation, a reminder that I pay my guests, I do all the work on this blinking thing, that would be very, very kind of you, and a few quid would go a very long way. Thanks to everyone who chips in. I need more. I could always do with more just to pay the bills. You can go to patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate to donate. And it's best to use that link. Go to the website, type patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate, not the Patreon iOS app, unless you really like giving Apple a big cut of your dosh. Drop me an email to hello@yourbrainonclimate.com with any feedback on the show, if you'd like to donate some other way, if you don't want to use Patreon. And please, please, please share, rate and review the podcast. You have got no idea how helpful that is. Thank you to the beautiful, talented, wonderful Ruth Everett for the voices. Thank you to Maggie Cat for the purring. That's all for now. I'll be back soon. Until then, try and think as few things as possible at the same time. You contain multitudes. That is beautiful. And until then, look after yourself. Bye. 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 No, you hang up.